Can you guys see my screen? All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is Todd Brous. I'm your host for the evening. I'm here with Susan Schultz and Ashley Wilson, and we would like to welcome everyone to HBAP Startups. So let's get started. First off, for those of you who are new to the Startups group, we have a few announcements that we do at the beginning of each meeting. We'll do some short networking breakout rooms, and we'll come back together for our main event. First off is our mission. We're here to help foster and fortify an innovation and entrepreneur community coming out of the Harvard Business Analytics program. And our goal is to provide our members with the tools, knowledge, leadership, and confidence necessary to create and grow their businesses from the ground up. Normally, I hand this off to Susan, but she unfortunately couldn't make it here tonight. But I just want to say if we do have a way to get in touch with us and connect with our community. And I'm trying to put this into the Zoom chat. So we do have a website and a newsletter. Please fill out, subscribe to our newsletter so we can newsletter you. Also, we have a YouTube channel where our recordings are posted. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos, feed that algorithm. We definitely appreciate that. Also, please bring a guest. We are open. We would love for you to invite and grow our community. And again, just as a little reminder, our recordings will be publicly posted on YouTube. Upcoming next week, Susan Schultz will be presenting her status update for TeamStack.ai, and we have a lot more people in the works, but we just haven't booked everyone just yet. And then the following week is a social for HBAPers. As a little reminder, this is our code of conduct, and our goal is to create an inclusive environment for everyone. We want this to be collaborative and based on confidentiality and trust, and all rights are reserved by the presenter. And please abide by the HBAP honor code, and we should conduct ourselves in ethical and moral ways. When it comes to giving feedback, we subscribe to the Francis Fry 5-to-1 feedback ratio, five Scooby snacks to every one piece of constructive advice, and no destructive advice. That doesn't help. And if a conflict of interest does arise, we agree to disclose, discuss, and decide on how to address it. So let's do some social breakout rooms. Bear with me for a second while I reset the Zoom rooms. This always takes a little bit of time, and while Susan's talking, I can do all of this. All right, I think I've got this working. I'll see you all in a few. Oh, wait, nope, that's not working. I have to recreate it, sorry. 2 people per room. All right, I think I got it. I think I got it. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, welcome back. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a great time in your breakout rooms. Got a few more people who joined while we were in the breakout rooms. Thank you all for coming. Just a little reminder, at the end of the evening when you leave Zoom, there'll be a little pop-up window. There'll be a little survey, gives us some feedback. Please fill out the survey. Filling out surveys saves lives. It will reduce your cholesterol levels. It will give you a great complexion. It will increase your stamina. And we're data people. We're data analytics people. So without data, we become very sad and upset. So please save that tree. Fill out that darn survey. And just a reminder, after we're done, we will stop the recording. And please do stick around for some overtime. And tonight, it is my honor to introduce our presenter and our speaker, Steve Rader. Steve was at NASA's Johnson Space Center for almost 36 years, where he worked on a number of small and insignificant projects, including the Space Shuttle, the International Space Station, the X-38 Crew Return Vehicle, the Constellation Program, and also diving deep into one of my personal favorite topics, open innovation. And for the past 11 plus years, Steve was leading NASA's Center of Excellence for Collaboration Innovation, and also the NASA Tournament Lab, where he helped all sorts of programs and projects at NASA and also across the entire federal government, help them learn how to leverage open innovation and open talent to find the ideas, the technologies, the experts who were needed to solve very hard problems in an age where the rate and magnitude of technological change is increasing exponentially. Today, Steve has retired from NASA, and when he's not enjoying his family, traveling, and learning, he speaks and consults on topics such as innovation, change management, open innovation, the future of work, space exploration, and creating and managing high-performing teams. On a personal note, I've had the opportunity and honor to work with Steve at the now sunsetted Center for the Transformation of Work, where I got to absorb all of his knowledge and wisdom about open innovation and open talent. So I'm completely thrilled that we get to hang out with Steve again tonight. So now, without further ado, as is our custom here at HBAP Startups, if we could all please briefly unmute ourselves and let's give a warm round of applause to Steve Rader.
Thanks, Todd.
Steve, let me stop sharing. Thank you for joining us. This is a real pleasure for me.
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. I have always loved Todd's energy. Whenever we're in meetings, we have a kind of almost contest of who can, fill up the chat more. It's wonderful stuff. Well, let's see. Todd pretty much gave you my bio. I will tell you my emphasis over the last few years has been open innovation and open talent. I really got into that back in around 2010 when I read Jeff Howe's book on open innovation, and honestly put the book down and said, oh my gosh, everything has changed. We really are now in a whole new kind of era where platforms are going to connect people in ways that we can innovate and do more in ways that we've never been able to before. And it's been fun watching NASA grow with that and being part of that mission over the last few years, and really just kind of seeing that unfold and getting to be part of that, and then to add in the open talent piece that's more recent, and then with generative AI coming in here in the last few years. So what I thought I'd do is walk through kind of what our program that we put together was, that journey. I know you guys have probably talked about open innovation several times, as well as open talent. And one of the interesting things I find about open innovation is that it is actually not always successful. It's this really fascinating, powerful tool that seems to have lots of failure. And I don't think that's because open innovation is bad. I think it's because we're trying to do some really hard things. And so I thought I'd start kind of going with this. And this is something I presented at the Open User Innovation area, and I mixed it in with some other stuff. But um, the these are the problems that we see. One is getting buy-in from the people that actually own the problem so that they will implement. Because one of the things about innovation that I think you can all agree with is innovation is only valuable in its implementation. An idea in someone's head or on a piece of paper is worthless until you actually get it out there and in use. And until then, it's what, right? It might be in 25 other people's heads. And so, it's something that people are really excited about having ideas, and that's great. But you have to actually get that into implementation for it to be valuable. And that kind of gets into this who owns the problem in an organization. We'll talk more about that. And then for me, almost everything we talk about is about matching. Matching needs to solutions, right? There's need solution pairs. If you're familiar with Eric von Hippel's work, he emphasizes that a lot, along with several other professors there. But this idea is that we are trying to actually match a need to some solution paths that's got within some set of constraints. And those can be ideas and concepts. A lot of times when people talk open innovation and an ideation contest, that's kind of how they think of a crowdsourced contest, is just ideas. But it can be deeper concepts. It can be entire designs, even prototypes. It can be information about existing stuff. It can actually be kind of text survey stuff. It can be an algorithm or data visualization or software or graphics and video, or maybe you just need an expert to come in and actually look very critically. So it's that, how do you connect to the idea, technology, or expertise that you need to solve your problem and to meet your need? And so part of this is access. And for us in the government, that was procurement, right? So how do you get access to these open innovation communities that can provide the best value given your needs and constraints for actually accessing both curated specialty and diverse crowds, ad hoc custom networks, AI assisted expert networks, freelance experts, crowds that use challenge format versus microtasking versus AI matching versus freelancers and hybrids. A lot of people like to just think of crowdsourcing as this one thing, but one of the things we discovered was there are a ton of models out there and they are each good for different things. And we needed to figure out how do we access the stuff so that we're meeting the most number of needs. So you'll see that's behind this. These were the problems that we were kind of facing. Um, and then across all that, there's this change management process, which is how do you get people to use new tools and utilize them across the whole enterprise, right? And we hear lots of issues there. So a little bit about the Center of Excellence. This Center of Excellence was actually stood up a couple years after Dr. Jeff Davis, had prototyped some of this work. He'd gone out to industry after getting a really big budget cut. He was the head of all human experimentation and animal experimentation for space, right? Life sciences type stuff. And he got this huge budget cut. He went out to industry to see what was going on out there, and he discovered, oh my gosh, open innovation is happening out there. And so he ran a pilot with Yet2, Topcoder, and Innocentive, which is now Wazoku. And it was very successful. It really succeeded in getting solutions that they had been working on for a long time in a very short amount of time and getting them new ideas that they had been stuck on. Um, Enter about 2011, the Obama White House came in and they said, hey, we really like what's going on in open source and open data and open innovation. We're really trying to promote that across the government. And it looks like you guys actually know what you're doing in open innovation in a way that others don't. Could you stand up a center of excellence to help other federal agencies understand what open innovation is and facilitate its use? And so after some debate internally to NASA, they took that on. And so the Center of Excellence was born, and a year or two after it was formed, I joined. But the idea there was, one, it elevated the function to the agency wide. So we were no longer just in Jeff Davis's organization, it was the whole organization now. And we had a mandate to kind of learn about it with academia. So we partnered with Kareem Lakhani and Eric von Hippel and others around academia to really understand what is this? How is it working? What are the incentives? Why are people doing this? But then also really kind of getting on the procurement side to find ways to get access to these different vendors and platforms out there so that different organizations around the government could use that. And so the processes and procurement mechanisms there to do that. So we had to work with legal and procurement and all those to try to figure out what was possible there. And then really getting out there and understanding it, then gathering data, preaching it, and getting out there and trying to help folks understand what it is and use it. And that's what we've been doing over the past, what is that, 14 years. So when we talk about these problems, I'm going to talk a little bit about one is the customer sensitive messaging targeted at owners. One of the things a lot of people in open innovation do is they say, hey, we're going to do open innovation. Here's $10 million. Let's go get a team, find a problem, and go run a big challenge on it. And we said that's a very risky thing because you're going to twist the arm of the owner of that problem to go do something and interrupt what they're doing. And they may not want to do that, and there's a lot of resistance. And in fact, there's a lot of data to say that's almost what happens every time. What we wanted to find is people that had problems that we could talk into using our method, and then they would bring money to the table and they would use this as a method. And in fact, we finally got to that. It took a long time. As you know, there is a Harvard Business School case study called Houston, We Have a Problem that is about NASA's rejection of this stuff, right? And so we really kind of created that customer focus, that this idea of we're going to make this not only something that you can do, but we're going to white glove it. We're going to make sure it's a good experience for you. You don't have to fill out a bunch of forms. We're going to do all that for you. We're going to get the procurement going for you, and you just have to show up for the fun parts, right? And that actually kind of created a way, along with a process, that we could kind of create this service. Um, but the big thing was kind of building this really robust ecosystem that could actually kind of pivot, because we couldn't just go hire one firm, right? We couldn't just say, okay, Top Coder, you're our one open innovation firm that we're going to use. And a lot of companies do that. They'll pick like two or three and that's it. But honestly, the industry was moving so much, and our needs were all over the place, along with our price points, that we didn't really understand how we were going to do that. So I'll talk a little bit about what we did. And the first thing we did was create this kind of toolkit, right? So we bought Incentive's kind of at home platform, or their at work platform, which was their internal crowdsourcing. We started with about 6,000 of our employees, and that has now grown and been rebranded to NASA Spark, to where we have about 30,000 employees that are on that internal platform. In Incentive, again, now Wazoku, we had a contract with, and Yet2 had a contract with. And then we actually had a contract with Harvard, who subcontracted with Tongle and Topcoder. And that's where a lot of that early stuff, 2011 to 2015, was done. And we would do three, four, five projects at a time, for maybe a total of 20, 25 projects over that period. But we had access to five different firms, which was great for us then. And that was about 1 million people worldwide. Compare that, though, to what we did next, was well, I'm sorry, I'm skipping a step. In 2015, we ran a micro purchase challenge pilot on Topcoder, because we kind of discovered that GrabCAD could do these very inexpensive challenges, not because that was their business model, but it was entertainment and curation for their crowd of designers. In other words, their designers would come to the site to kind of learn techniques for CAD and do other things, but they wanted something. They wanted to engage in something. And so NASA design challenges were these great opportunities for them. We really wanted them on contract because we thought this was really valuable work. And they said, no, we don't want to. They're an Estonian company, or from Estonia. They didn't want to do an American contract. And so I said, well, the only way we can do business with you is on a government purchase card, with a maximum at the time of $2,500. And they said, great, we'll do contests for $2,500 all day long. And we were kind of stunned. As the card increased, we've continued to do those, but now it's $10,000. And to date, that continues to be amazing challenges that have great participation, that really build a big rapport with that crowd. But what that turned us on to is, wow, maybe there's other platforms that are doing other things that don't advertise as open innovation platforms. And sure enough, Freelancer was one of those, which was really, at the time, they had about 10 million at the time. They're 78 million now. And they were really doing an internal platform where it was freelancers hiring each other. They weren't really hiring by many other folks. And they had, as part of their platform, contests. And you could really, people were doing $20 contests. It was kind of like Fiverr. They were just doing these really inexpensive contests. And so we were like, well, okay, let's see what we could do for that. And so we ran I got $10,000 to run some challenges. I ended up running 24 challenges. And it was interesting because I actually ended up running challenges. And because we were NASA, I had to actually reduce the prize amount, because otherwise we were going to get 10,000 submissions and we couldn't handle it. So we had to scale down the incentives, not because we didn't want to give away more money. It was simply we had to find that balancing. But what we discovered was, oh my gosh, there's all sorts of really interesting stuff that we could get out there. And one of the things we discovered, that this was one of the best public engagement tools that NASA had ever come up with. Um, the idea that NASA for many years was, look at all the cool stuff we're doing in space. Don't you wish you worked for us? Was kind of the way we did it. And it was kind of like, yeah, go get that STEM degree. Maybe you can come work for us. But then we're really exclusive and don't let anyone work for us, right? Um, and what we were saying now was, hey, we have problems that we need your help with. Come help us. And there were so many people that that they would write me and say, "You made my dream of working for NASA, for the space program, come true." And I would look them up and I'd be like, "You didn't even win." And it was for like some $80 logo. And it was amazing. And we were finding that there were more to this than just the money. And particularly for challenges where people aren't trying to make a living, but rather they're trying to hone their skills, they're trying to contribute, they're trying to be, but there was another part to this equation. So it was really interesting. It kind of got us into the open talent world because we were like, well, this crowd isn't even about contests. This crowd is about work. And we started realizing that the world was changing and new expertise was coming online, and that these communities would have that expertise far earlier than anybody else. And so we started becoming interested in that. In 2015, we actually put our first NASA Open Innovation Services contract together. This is where we actually invited multiple vendors to get onto our contract so that we would have access to lots of different communities that did different things in different ways. So we had Top Coder, Common Pool, Incentive, HeroX, Kaggle, Luminary Labs, Nine Sigma, OpenIDEO, Tongle, and Petexia. This is so 10 firms. Now, instead of 1 million folks, we had like 2 to 3 million community members. And we actually it was a $20 million value over 5 years, meaning we could do up to $20 million worth of work. We ended up maxing that out. We had 57 projects that ran over that 5 years. This last 5 years, during that period, what we discovered was we could do all sorts of things out there through these platforms. And in fact, learned how to do um, a bunch of crowd-based challenges for different products and different kinds of things. Um, then came 2020, right? And we did our second round of so second 5-year contract. This time, instead of 10 companies, we initially ended up with 19 and then had an onboarding to get to a total of 32 just on that one contract. Um, and so we could really find the right crowd for the right one. And it was a competitive task order. So they would compete with little mini proposals, 5-page, PDFs, where they would say, this is why you should pick us to do this task order. And we would usually have anywhere from 2 to 5 of the vendors compete on those, and we were able to find just the right um, crowd that could do that task really, really well. Um, we also learned more about open talent. This one opened up. You can see freelancer on there. You can see like CrowdPlat along with who's the other one? Um, Business Talent Group and Maven, all which were open talent only platforms. And we started actually broaching that concept with our HR folks as, hey, we're going to need access to these. We're going to start prototyping what that starts to look like. Um, you can see along the bottom, we could get the purchase cards. We could go to several different smaller crowds as long as we kept the price tag under 10,000. And then we still had our internal crowd along with an education crowd with future engineers, and then our MIT and Lish folks at Harvard. Um, but now we're representing not just a million people or 10 million. Now we're at 120 million people worldwide that we're tapping into in our ecosystem. Um, yeah, and this just notes that of that, the 16 open talent firms that we had there. Um, We are now on our third generation. It's actually supposed to announce any day now, and it's actually a 10-year, almost $500 million contract. Um, that mechanism attracted, like we initially started at $25 million cap on noise two. We had to raise that by 7x to 175 million because the demand around the government started going up, and that's why we ended up with this $475 million cap for the contract that's coming out. All that to say, it's not sexy to talk about procurement, but I guarantee you, procurement and legal is where this stuff secret sauce lies, right? And that's what we found. Um, so back to the same kind of all the different kinds of things we could do. we also gathered lots and lots of data around each of these challenges that we ran, such that we could start estimating for people, hey, you want to do this kind of challenge? That normally takes about this long for about this kind of money. And that was a big part of this, is just learning how to estimate open innovation, which was something no one had done before, right? Or it was really hard to do. And then we could also find that it was a subset of these vendors that was gonna, these communities that would be an asset depending on what you were trying to do. So, driven data and Topcoder and CrowdPlat, all really great at algorithm work. Whereas if you're going to do design work, now you're talking GrabCAD or HeroX or Wazoku, right? So kind of some interesting stuff, and that's how we grew the procurement. Okay, I'm going to move on from procurement because that's really, really boring. But it is the secret of how we kind of built that really robust capability. When I left, we were doing something like 70 to 100 projects at any one given time, right? So it was now a process that we were using for almost every program around the agency and across the government. Um, I wanted to start with go back over some of the best practices and lessons learned we had. One, which I've mentioned already, is this idea of starting with the stakeholders. This is something that was different about our program, but what we decided was this is a tool that really addresses the problem of rapid technological change in a way that nothing else does. And it is a necessary tool for almost every engineer and scientist around NASA at some point. And so they need to understand what it is and actually have access to it. And so we were really focused on this bottoms up, getting this into the hands of the folks that actually had the real problems. And that way, we would have the full buy-in and the implementation phase. But again, innovation's only valuable in the implementation, right? Um, but to get it out there first, we really had to get into the selling the open innovation. And I'll talk through a little bit about that, which is getting the data, uh, starting with the why and also the customer problem. Just to give you an idea, for a long time we were selling this by explaining what crowdsourcing was, and that actually wasn't really helpful. It's in several ways that kind of led us down that path of being rejected, right? Because if you're at NASA, you really came there to be the innovator, right? And you beat out a whole bunch of people to be there to do that. And when you got there, you found out that just like any other organization, innovation is only something you get to do every 3 or 4 years for a couple of weeks. And it's not something that you get to do all the time, because the way the life cycle of a product work or a mission work, you can only get that upfront ideation time early on. Now, you can argue there's lots of opportunities to do innovation, and you should. But the mindset is, I barely ever get to do this. Most of my time's in meetings or doing paperwork, and you're wanting to outsource the thing that I came here to do. And that's where that rejection came from, right? And so we really had to kind of take a step back and come at this in a couple of different ways. And one of the things was to get to the why. And so we put together a set of charts that basically said, look, open innovation is special, but we didn't start with that. We said, look, we're going to tell you something that everyone knows, and I'm sure Todd, you've shared this or parts of this, is the world has changed, and if you look at how it's changed, the change is so much bigger than you realize. One, I use this all the time and have for a long time. This guy at Harvard made this estimate, and this is 10 years ago, so it's probably a lot worse than this now. But 90% of all scientists on planet Earth are estimated to be alive today. And just if you think about the fact that all those dead scientists, that 10% are responsible for most everything you learned in college, and everyone else is working on something new, and they're not using pencil and paper anymore. They're using generative AI, CRISPR, 3D printing, software analysis tools, like modeling tools, all sorts of tools. And put on top of that, just simply the growth in the population and the wealth around the world, to where I saw a stat the other day that was like, oh gosh, I'm hoping I remember this. It was something like in the 80s, there were something like 25 100,000 professors or something like that. And now it's 1.5 million. That's just in the US. Look around the world, and the number of schools has gone up astronomically. You can go get a decent engineering degree in India and Pakistan, in Vietnam. All of these places are churning out high-end technical people. There are MITs of India, if you will, that they will tell you about. Um, and these people all around the world are creating this tsunami of technology because they're taking the chat GPT or that new nano coding or that new software package, and they're stacking it into new products to the tune, I think you guys talked about this probably, right? That there's something like an estimate of 1 million startups a day around the world. Like it's crazy, right? Um, but the thing about these technologies is a lot of them are built on some core technology. You see that slide 8, this mini slide, sorry about that. But I talked about these building block technologies like 3D printing, like generative AI. And the thing about them is they don't belong to a single industry. They belong to every industry. And so you're getting innovation happening in parallel in every industry where they're actually adapting to fix their problem, but at the same time developing new kind of combinations of innovation that are useful elsewhere. Um, and so there's kind of this pro of there's never been a time where there's been as many useful solutions out there than in the universe. But the con is, and this is the big point I like to make to all of our people, is you can't find them. If you think you can find the technologies you need to make your solution cutting edge, the starting point for your innovation, if you think you can find all of the technologies that might help you by doing a Google search, then you don't understand what's happening in the world. You don't understand that these things are behind IP firewalls and in government labs and everywhere, and that it takes a human network to go find this. And this idea of rapid change and hard to keep up with tech advances, that is creating this real problem in industry, right? Where there's this high risk of remaining competitive because there's trends showing that companies are shrinking in their duration of lifespan. And I actually use Subsea 7 as an example where, you know, they did a search to try to find a better way to inspect pipelines, and they found something literally in 2 weeks using open innovation, something that could do the job of pipeline inspection in 2 hours instead of 2 weeks with a handheld unit instead of a big van-sized piece of equipment that has to be lowered into the ocean and take 2 weeks, right? But what they said was, yes, this is going to save us hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But what they really said is, but if we hadn't found this technology that had been developed and was in use in the mining industry already, wasn't in a lab somewhere, already existed. If we hadn't found that and our competitor had, we would no longer be in this business. And I think that's one of the things we see over and over is disruption can drop on you like a tarantula in the rainforest. No, it's not a good example. It can really just drop in on you, right? As something that you're just not expecting. And now with this much technological development going on, it's happening more frequency. Now, one of the points I make is, hey, turns out open innovation is this thing. Don't need to do that. Open innovation is this thing. Hang on, that can actually filter all of this and act as a dragnet across all of these industries and use human networks to find the solutions, ideas, technologies, experts that you need to have the starting point for your innovation, right? So it's no longer we're using the message of this is replacing you as an innovator. This is we basically can get you the starting point you need to go innovate, right? And so that's just a word trick, but it does the trick when you're trying to actually convince somebody to go use these tools. We do some on explaining how these work. I won't go into all this because I think you guys know how open innovation works. But the bottom line is that we do kind of cover that. We then kind of get into open talent and say, hey, look, we found this in open innovation. Then we started looking at open talent and we realized, oh my gosh, there's this huge kind of migration going on. And uh, as we as NASA are going to try to access talent and solutions, we need to learn how to use this as a tool because we are no longer going to be able to just count on people lining up at our door. And we were saying this back in 2015 and 2016. And by 2020, sure enough, suddenly NASA was not getting the applications. Suddenly we were not like just something that we could count on getting the best and brightest. It just wasn't showing up. People weren't signing up anymore. And we were also finding that we couldn't onboard all of the skills. In fact, I'm convinced that and I say this all the time, if recruit and retain is your only model for bringing on talent and you're in a tech driven industry, you're in an unsustainable situation because there's too many skills coming on. There's too many technologies coming on board where you need this little slice for this amount of time. You don't need to create an entire job for that. You need someone to come in and help you. And quite frankly, there's things being becoming obsolete that you need to jettison. So you've got to figure out how do you become more agile so that you can have the right core team that's maybe full time, but how are you augmenting that with open innovation? How are you augmenting that with remote workers, whatever that is, right? And what is that hybrid solution that can get you that agility that you need in terms of skills and tasks? Um, so we'll kind of walk through what's going on there, the lifelong learning, what all open talent can do. And again, I contend this is the largest kind of organizational change problem that has come along in the last 150 years. And you add on to that the chaos of generative AI and how that's now kind of masking the technical skills problem you have. Uh, People are really stuck on how to staff organizations. I'm seeing so many startups come out now that are little mini networks of freelancers because they've figured out, hey, I can go build a bench of a bunch of different folks. And guess who's going to win when it's some startup struggling to pay full time for 3 or 4 people when they really need 15 skills versus somebody who's basically freelancing 15 freelancers of different skills just for what they need, right? You're already seeing that happen. Um, so I talked through this. The only other thing, and I'll stop here soon. You can ask Todd. I'm somewhat long-winded, uh, but stories matter.
Keep going, Steve. I'm loving this. You're fantastic.
One of the things that became very clear to us was that if we wanted people to understand this and embrace this, that stories really mattered, and that data was really vital to that. So we gathered as much data as we could, such that now we can say, hey, that we've done 850 projects. Of those, 95 were successful, and we could show you kind of what that meant when we said, is it successful? How successful? Was it fully solved? Was it mostly solved? Was it sort of solved, right? Oops. And we could do things like how much would this have cost if you had used other methods? And we could say, how much is that savings once you got there? And I think we also did one on costs, on schedule savings, which is similar. And then we could say, hey, over this time period, we think we've saved the government a ton of money. And in fact, we've saved probably twice as much as we've spent on this stuff, which is not bad stats, right? Um, we could also show that, hey, look, this stuff actually has a big uptake. We're having successes that people are telling other people about, and we're actually seeing that growth over time. Um, and we're seeing more investment. People are coming in initially. In fact, we used to call it the kind of crack sample that the drug dealer gives out to get people hooked. We would do that with logo challenges where we could say, hey, look, give us $300. We'll get you this amazing contest. They'll get you a logo. And what happened was really cool because most projects couldn't afford logos with the in-house team because it would cost them $3 or $4,000 and take 2 or 3 months. And they didn't have the time or the budget to do that. But for $300, they could give it to Gus. We could get it on Freelancer and we would have 100 folks participate and have the benefit of people feeling like they were contributing to the mission. So it was kind of a really nice way to get people in the door. And suddenly the light would come on of, oh, this is an effective tool that actually could, if this works for graphics, maybe it works for technical stuff too. Um, and then we kind of reworked to where we didn't actually talk about our case studies in terms of who the crowd winners were. Instead, since we were talking this internal, we would make the NASA challenge owner, the problem owner, the hero. In fact, in this one, this is John Mather. He's a Nobel Prize winning scientist at NASA who actually happily came to us and said, "Hey, I'm trying to build these star shades, they're big as a football field out in space that you put between the telescope and some planet that you're pointing at, and you literally put it, 100 miles from it. But it sits there and you basically, it shields the light from the star, which would be the equivalent of the sun for that solar system. And it shields that light so that in the areas around that star shade, you can actually see planets. So they'll actually block out the light in those little spaces that you're getting from the glow, right? And he was trying to propose this. We did a grab CAD challenge. Again, didn't cost very much for us, but we engaged, 60 different designs. People were getting to work on space stuff, and it was really cool. But notice the thing that we focused on was this idea of storytelling, fear of missing out. Hey, this guy used this. He got really great results for not a lot of money, and we got to engage a lot of people. And he's being successful using this. You can too, right? So is that whole kind of idea of storytelling of lots of data, kind of putting people in a role that they could imagine themselves, rather than putting, the winner of this contest up there and them thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so much more well qualified. I could, and what people would do would, it wouldn't matter what solution we got because they were more qualified in their own eyes, they would have been able to do better, right? And we're like, but you weren't, you didn't. So, but you didn't want to get in that argument, right? You were trying to get it used. So I think our last one was this idea of customer service. I don't know if you've worked in government, but most organizations, especially when they work with each other, do not think of themselves as customer service. In fact, most of them can't tell you who their customer is. We very much realized that if people didn't have a good experience here with a clean process that didn't take very long, that didn't cost very much, didn't have much overhead, that they would if we said go use open innovation and they had to go create their own contract and go get legals weigh in and go try to work out the paperwork, that as soon as they hit a speed bump, they would say, nope, not for me. And this is one of the reasons I think open innovation fails in a lot of organizations, is it gets pitched, it gets handed off to a couple people, they decide all they need to do is tell people about it, and then it'll happen. And they don't realize procurement and legal and HR are all important components that aren't even the main players, right? That will actually put up speed bumps and stop the whole process, right? So we pretty much made our job to be Sherpas to kind of put all that together. That's Diane Finkhausen's term um, from GE. And we built this process, which ended up turning out really great because now we're doing that as a digital process, which means we can speed it up even more as a Salesforce driven process and ensuring that everybody has a good progress. So this is kind of where the future state is. The core team is this very talented, passionate team that's working and it's very scalable across both NASA and the federal government. We put together an entire Salesforce digital program that is integrating a lot of these pieces so that when someone comes with a problem, we can very rapidly kind of put that statement of work together, get it out to the vendors. In fact, if you brought a problem to COSI today, in 3 to 4 weeks, someone would actually, we would have a vendor on contract creating a challenge for you that would launch shortly after. And for some things, we could do that in 2 weeks. It was like people around the government would come to us and they'd say, nobody can ever run this fast. It's impossible. And because we had good processes and focused on really compressing timelines, we became a very valuable asset to around the government just because of speed. That open talent, open innovation ecosystem, that's a huge thing. Being able to get to Upwork or Wazoku or whoever was the best option and doing that contractually easily was an important piece, and I think was a high scoring factor for us. There's a trained workforce. There's actually an open innovation academy that I mentioned, trying to get every scientist and every engineer understanding what this is and knowing who to talk to, as if it was anything else that they would have for procurement or HR. That's what we're doing. And in fact, they're putting people through that now. People are volunteering to come halftime for a full year rotation with the team to learn how this works so that they can go back and be that maven for it, to recognize the opportunities, to help people connect to it. And then actually, that's a key scaling factors, right? So just execution scaling, you've got to compress the process and then make it super easy for anyone to do. And that's all part of that. Uh, the Spark internal workforce hub, increasing the curation that they're doing with that and trying to make that a really powerful innovation force within the agency, which I think anybody doing open innovation should very much have an internal if they're of any size, because there's a lot to be learned there. It's often the very first challenge you do to find out what do we even know internal to our organization within our stovepipes. And then lastly, they are likely, if the cuts don't get them, going to launch a public curated community. I would love to talk about community curation in our open discussion, but we can talk about the value of that. And that's pretty much all I brought for you guys. Hopefully that wasn't too boring and too many nuts and bolts there, but that's kind of from our trenches that we've been doing, and it was really hard to leave that group. But if you can retire, why not, right?
If you can retire, why not? Yes, right, exactly. Steve, thank you for this. This is really priceless. I got a million questions, but so I just want to make a little announcement. Folks, if you have any questions, please raise your Zoom hands. I'll call on you in a second. I've got so many questions for you, Steve. It's ridiculous. Um, I guess the first low-hanging fruit question that I have is a technical one about how would you go about framing. I'd ask, how would you go about framing the problem that you're gonna dump onto the crowd? It seems to
Yeah,
me that like it's not about the big problem. You're gonna have to distill it down into a small,
yeah,
real, concise, specific input, specific output. What
yeah.
Give me some advice and guidelines to make that work.
Yeah, well, yeah, like you say, crowdsourcing the way it is implemented today is about individuals, right? Unless you're going to put really big dollars towards it, like a DARPA self-driving car challenge, where it's, $10 million prize over multiple years, you're not going to get a lot of teams forming for, a 100K kind of prize or 50K kind of prize. So the way most open innovation is done, you're going to get one, maybe a team of two or three, which means the scope of that problem can't be systems level. It has to actually be narrower, because you can't have responsibility for software, electronics, chemistry, all of those. That requires a team. So for us, whenever the problem would come to us, the very first thing we would do is screen it for, whoa, whoa, whoa. A, do you know what your problem is? What we would find is a lot of times they would have an inkling of a problem, but we often find, and I find this in almost every organization, people haven't spent enough time on the problem. So there's not a consistent understanding of the constraints or the assumptions or the piece parts or the scope. And so we would first work on that. And when we could, we would break it down, and see if we could make it smaller. Because then you could be more cost effective, because they would almost come always with not enough money. So the more you could do to descope it, the better. The second thing we did is we tried not to over specify the contest itself. We tried to define the problem and what we wanted as the results, which would kind of define the criteria for evaluation. But it wouldn't necessarily design the contest because we're working with, if you include all the P card and everybody, 50 different models for how to do a contest, right? And so our thesis was that each of those crowds was curated in a different way. Some of them had done, daily contests with their people. Others had done, kind of form a community and then do a contest with them. And so what we decided was we would focus on the problem definition and we would hand it to them for the challenge formulation, which often included whether they needed to abstract the language. We would also get the requirements for, can we say that we're NASA? Do we not want to say we're NASA? And those
I'm
kind
going to come back to
of,
that, but yeah, keep
absolutely.
going.
Yeah. There's some really fascinating stories from other agencies on that. And it is one of these things where you really want to understand how do you get the best from them and how do you kind of set us up. And so we tried to not over specify. Now I say that if that uh, the platform and the contractor came back and they came back with a statement and we were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is way too broad, or this is too specific, or this uses jargon, because we had the best practices that understood that you really want a challenge statement and a challenge design that brings in the most diversity while still bringing in depth of expertise where you can. So you didn't want to sacrifice and just get breadth. You wanted actually this kind of uh, deep and wide kind of thing. And that it mattered what your intellectual property stance was. Were you trying to get all the IP? Were you leaving it there? Were you licensing it? What was that? What could they expect in return? Why are people going to do this?
Yeah, so and again, going back to those incentives, I quote you often uh, with the four G's:
The
the
four
gold, the
Gs.
guts, the glory, and the good.
Mhm.
Um, going back to what you said about not from NASA, that's doesn't that isn't that a problem? And how is that manifesting itself? Like in other
Yeah.
words, I mean, like the example I like to give is like the open innovation challenge where, hey, help us
Yeah.
find bison in Yellowstone, but oh no, that
Yeah.
was actually for the Central Intelligence Agency,
Yeah.
allegedly.
Yeah.
John Frederickson was telling me that I was wrong in that, but he
Oh,
didn't tell
yeah.
me that he didn't say the truth.
Well,
So I'm
the
like, oh,
CIA is the one that told me. So, you
yeah.
know,
So and again, he by the way, I'm talking about a person who a mutual a colleague of ours who used to work at Wazuko and Incentive who was in charge of that, and
yeah.
he's like, no, 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 that's not the truth. I'm like, well, the truth is what's out there. So I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah. Yeah.
something, but so how do you
Yeah.
deal with this what I see as a problem of lying to the crowd?
Yeah. So most of the time, they're well, most of the time NASA did not. In fact, I think we maybe once or twice didn't list who we were, which we were very careful not to lie to the crowd. We simply didn't say who we were. So you're putting a technical problem that was not necessarily specified as a NASA rocket or a NASA whatever, right?
But why did they do that? Why did they choose?
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
often
wrong.
it's right. Companies do it for protecting their IP and protecting competitiveness. So when we talked
Yeah.
about Lay's potato chips, Frito-Lay doing the potato chip, they didn't want other potato chip makers to see this and know that they were kind of working on this because then there would, just the knowledge that you're working on something is sometimes a disadvantage if you're
But
not careful.
I mean, but the other thing. Oh, so by the way, for folks who don't know, this Lay's potato chip challenge was a contest. I believe I forget what platform this was.
Incentive.
It was an event
Yeah.
incentive. It was remove a viscous fluid from a thin wafer. And it's a brilliant challenge. And the winning solution was from a woman a violinist,
Yeah.
who was an expert in understanding acoustic vibration. And she said, do this. It's a genius solution.
Yeah.
The problem is that's a $2 billion solution.
Mhm.
Not even just the idea, but how it was solved
Yeah.
and how to implement the solution. That's a $2 billion
Sure.
solution. She
Sure.
made $10,000 on
Sure. But think about what she did.
nothing,
She did almost nothing.
almost
Like
nothing.
She recognized something that tens of thousands of people, maybe millions of people were aware of. She simply connected the dots.
She connected the dots.
And she didn't come up with the mechanism or test it or, like again, innovation is valuable in its implementation. And so
100%.
the discovery is an important piece, and I don't want to mitigate that. It is not the pure value of it. Like the likelihood that she would have taken that idea independently thought, that could actually be applied to potato chips. I'm going to start my own potato chip manufacturing and I'm going to go do that. That was 0%,
Well,
right?
also, here's the problem.
Yeah,
And this goes back to the not from NASA. This was not from Lay's. So
right.
she had
She
no
did.
idea
Sure.
what
Sure.
the actual value of
Yeah.
her solution was. So
Sure.
she couldn't, and again, this was done intentionally. This was designed to obfuscate the real use case
Sure.
from the crowd. You're lying to the crowd in order to protect your intellectual property. And then
Well,
all of a
they
sudden,
were lying. They were simply stating the problem in a generic way. Not there. The reason Incentive was the one who actually came and wanted to say, let's not say how to get grease off potato chips. It resulted in it being obfuscated. The reason they did that was to bring in non-food scientists. Because if you said, how do I get grease off potato chips? Most of the people that would have bid on that or come to work on it would have been food scientists,
and
food
you're,
production, and everyone else would go, I don't know anything about
I don't know
potatoes.
anything
I
about
don't know
food. Yeah,
anything about grease. But if I say, how do you remove a viscous fluid from a delicate wafer? Now I have abstracted the problem. I'm not lying what it is. I'm simply abstracting it into the physics,
that
which is,
I understood.
yeah.
But the catch here is the value
Mhm.
of this invention is
Yeah.
orders of magnitude greater than the contest prize. So how do we reconcile the, and
Yeah.
again, I
Well,
have an answer to this, but how do we reconcile this obfuscation?
yeah. I think every person that decides to be part of a challenge should consider for themselves what's the value of their idea and do
Yeah.
they get, and this is why I say when we design it, if you're doing something complicated that the person is going to come up with something that's really they could patent and go do something with, then we talk about that. We are like, well, you're going to have to offer a bigger prize if you
Okay.
really want the IP.
I
Um,
like that.
but if it's an idea or you're trying to look for someone who can make a connection into another industry or something that exists, that's not the same.
Well,
It is, and I'll say, I don't think that was $1 billion idea. That was a improvement on their yield, which is likely to have been a fairly modest, maybe even break even kind of modification. Like the time to pay off how much it would have cost them to go do that is likely would have been on the 5 to 10 year range. It wouldn't
oh,
like,
interesting.
oh,
Okay.
we're going to do one run. So part of that is too, like scales of industry are obviously bigger, but we have to kind of be careful there because here's how I talk about ideas and the discovery phase. The discovery phase is 1% of the process. 99% of the sweat that goes into making something, it's only 1%. But if you're not actually discovering the best ideas and the best technology, that 1% acts as a multiplier to the value of what you end up getting at the end. And so it's this really important piece. And I think to your point, sometimes that value needs to be shared and reward
And I
depending
think
on
that's part of it. I mean,
but it
I have
depends
a
on the
quote.
technical. How much did it take for them to do? Now, if she had come up with this, like, oh, here is the design that I have done to do, well, that's different. Like now she's actually saved them a lot of research and money. And so it kind of depends on what are you doing? Are you connecting dots? Are you coming up with detailed design? And there's a whole
I think
range.
there's a sucker born every minute who's willing to contribute to an open innovation challenge.
Well,
Again, self-selection is everything.
so I'm a sucker because
Yeah.
I would do I'm an idea guy and I know I will never go do it.
Right.
And so I'll do all sorts of crap for not a lot of money. Now, are they robbing me? If I'm willing, I'm
But
not sure
so
that that's the case.
they're not
The
robbing
guy,
you if you are self-selecting and there's transparency. But there's a quote
yeah,
from
yeah.
Ryan Stewart. Does that name ring a bell?
Ryan's my deputy.
Yeah,
He's the guy who now runs
he runs the stuff now. So I have a quote from him, and
yeah,
he said this: "If we reframe the problem to disguise who we are or what the problem is, it gets hard for folks to know what's really going on. You're lying to the crowd." And this, to me, this is an incentive problem. This is like, hey, we're not going to tell you really
yeah,
what you're doing, and this hurts the wisdom of the
yeah,
crowd. This is
yeah,
a deterrent every time a person who or an organization who puts something out into the
yeah,
crowd using any of these open innovations from Tongle to Topcoder, whatever it is, and they're obfuscating the use. They do harm to the platforms, they do harm to the crowd,
yeah.
and it's a disincentive.
It's definitely a trade, right? Obviously, if Warner Brothers says they're going to run something on Tongle, they're going to get a whole lot more people jumping in, right?
Right.
Now, those people also might be like, hey, this price should be a little bit more than if it's some indie film, right? And we have those human fairness dynamics that go on all the time, which are interesting in and of themselves, right? People are like, oh, you have big pockets, therefore you should be paying more. But an indie film, their connections sometimes are as big or bigger, right? So some of that is perception. I would say too, the open innovation industry would likely not exist if there weren't a way for companies to basically not say who they are because of competitiveness issues. I know that is one of the things I have to explain to organizations is look, these companies work with commercial companies every day that have competitiveness and trade secrets and all those kinds of issues. And if they didn't say, oh yeah, we don't have to put your brand name on this, uh, you know, the crowd's not stupid. They know
Right.
who the players are, and they can make the
Well, I
connection.
mean, look,
But a lot of them don't care. Like a lot of them, you're in it for the cool problem, right? Or you're doing it. So kind of interesting. Thank you. Go ahead.
and again, like this is those incentives, the four G's, the gold, the guts, the glory, and the good. When you're lying to the crowd, you're taking advantage of their good.
Yeah, if
You're
you're
just,
lying,
yeah.
like again, I
So
would contend
don't
most
lie
of the time you're not lying.
most
You
of the time.
now there are cases where I think it was very deceitful, but most of the time they're basically putting a problem out there and people are solving it. The deception comes when somebody goes, "Oh, I'm going to take this solution and I'm going to go use it in this different way." Is that deception or is that
Well, it,
I mean,
if
it's an
if
interesting
you're transparent,
question.
it's not deception. I mean, look, and by the way, like that's one of the superpowers of open innovation. If you
Yeah,
are a company and you have intellectual property
yeah,
that's idle, patents is the low hanging fruit
yeah,
example, and we're not using these patents, we can now run open innovation, whether it's a challenge contest or any of the other mechanisms, and find other industries that are not competing with what we do that can utilize our intellectual property, and then that's a superpower. But that's different because that's a business to business type thing as opposed to we've invented a arguably $2 billion solution to improve oil extraction from potato
yeah,
chips. That's
yeah,
insanely huge. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
All right,
And
there's oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, the ExxonMobil, the Exxon Valdez cleanup where the guy had the shaker, like that was an existing technology
Brilliant.
that they did save a ton of money, but does he deserve a lot? Like he didn't develop the tech, he just connected it, right? So like it's just a really tricky thing sometimes to
And
say
that's also for the good.
balance.
That is for the
Yeah,
good of humanity,
exactly, exactly.
right? That is high profile. I forget the. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the Exxon Valdez was an oil spill, and a gentleman figured out a way to clean it up beautifully with
The congealed oil of
congealed
the
oil.
very, very cold ocean. It was solved
And
by
I
cement.
know we've got questions from Adolfo and
Yep.
Victor, hands up, but my other question,
Yeah.
and this has to do with a hypothesis that I've been running, talking with a bunch of open innovation researchers and practitioners. about how artificial intelligence and agentic AI will affect all of this stuff. I'm, to just ground the concept here, if the smartest person we can hire is not a human, what are we talking about? I'm quoting
Yeah.
Mocha. Why would we need outside in open innovation? Why run a challenge contest if I
Yeah.
can ask AI to do it? And
Yeah.
NASA, who's exceptionally organized at this point, you've got the infrastructure that with COSI to organize these challenge contests. So then can you just substitute the crowd for a well-prompted agentic AI?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one we've been talking to Kareem and his team about for months now. Um,
Get
and you know,
Kareem to come.
the early study he did said, yeah, for ideation, pretty, you're probably going to get for the money a lot more diverse ideas pretty quickly. I think you're probably not going to get necessarily the contextually dispersed connections across industries because context is not something that the need solution pair thing. This is something that Shannon held, I think, is working on with need solution pairs, where she can start to use AI to kind of create the context that's then transferable across. It's not there yet.
Right.
And I think when it comes to problem solving, we kind of have a simple model in our head in that, oh, this goes here and in slot, into this slot, and then we're done. But problem solving in design work is really a whole series of things, right? And this is where I get really excited about where the next generation could go because I think AI coupled with high performing teams in a crowd could, and then orchestrated through a series of steps, and you've heard me talk about this, could really be the super machine, right?
Yeah.
Which is taking taking people and really matching them on the skills necessary for that particular task in a way that they already know each other and have trust because there's ways you can do that and record that, but also matched on personality type so that they're actually going to actually feel the most appreciated and the most, and that which will amp up their creativity and their the way they work, and then trained on problem analysis and innovation techniques and design. And if you start to do that, and they can use generative AI, and maybe some of those team members are agentic AI, right?
Right.
Then you start to get really interesting, high capacity capability where literally you can go from taking a problem to generating 45 different analyses that then come down to the base that then go back out to 50 different solutions. And you literally can take a crowd of a half a million people and be generating just team after team after team that are competing and adding. And you can track the value of those contributions such that you can then reward and give people kind of, hey, your solution you worked on way back here actually made it in the real design. You're going to get a bigger piece of the pie.
A
It's
bigger.
not just this little bit. That gets to be really exciting for me because I think it helps people to be at their best. And I think people will have things to bring, if nothing else, to help the queries and pull the agents together to orchestrate them. Uh, and I think you're going to have that kind of diverse set of skills necessary to connect and pull in all the pieces.
So, and I know I've got hands. I got one last question. So, are you familiar with Anne Marjak's book on unleashing the crowd? She talks about wicked problems,
Hmm.
where and you said earlier, like how how you're framing the problem and you're focusing on small teams and individuals. She starts to look at open innovation with a completely new perspective and going after the bigger problems, the wicked problems, the highly complicated stuff, where instead of you have a team of people with or without AI, I think she wrote the book before we had
Yeah.
agentic AI. I know she did. But where you have where you're allowing the teams and the people and the crowd to collaborate on the solution. you're un and her word in the book she refers to as unmind cuffing the crowd. This then gets into this like where, hey, we're going to create a community of people and they're all going to be part of this,
Yeah.
and they're going to be able to build on top of their own ideas. They're able to, there's going to be transparency in what everybody's
Yeah.
working on. To me, that's like a dream come true. And have you, with any of the stuff
Yeah.
that you worked on with
Yeah.
in NASA, had any situation where you were just like, it's a free for all, a collaboration of the
Um,
crowd?
I mean, so I'll tell you where I found that was quirky. When
Oh,
and that was like when I read the book, I immediately went out and joined five crowds, and Quirky was one of them. And when I did it, I discovered really them and Topcoder are in my minds the quintessential model of curation because they knew how to suck you in to come in every day and not just come in with a big idea, right? Which they did ask for that. But then when people, they identified a product to go develop, they would say, okay, now give us your improvements, and you would have to propose these improvements, and you'd be trying to solve problems, or you'd be picking the color, and every time they were recording kind of what your contribution would be as a winner, and those turned into real money. It was a fascinating process. I would love to do that because people get snippets of that when they do a hackathon, right? They get
right.
really excited because they have this kind of instant of, and then they can't sustain it because it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think you could create this process where you're getting the best of that kind of surge while still actually getting people to participate. Because I participated on X38, which was a high performing team, and COSI, which was a high performing team. There's nothing like it when
It's the
your
best
when
feeling.
your contributions are appreciated and you're able to think and you're not shot down for your innovative thinking and and people are kind of pulling the best from you and it's positive, like the people will almost pay to work in a team like that.
Well, oh yeah, oh gosh. But again, we want to pay the crowd. We don't
I
want
understand.
to,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Uh,
again, this gets into value, which is fundamentally what you're continuing to ask, which is how do we get better at rewarding people for the value that they contribute rather than their time or some arbitrary kind of thing. How do we get to where that's the thing? And honestly, with AI, and blockchain and a bunch of other things, I think we're in the position to start asking those questions about looking at who all is involved through the life cycle of a product and really trying to identify those contributions in a manner. Music industry is already doing it, right? So they're already taking recordings and saying, okay, the bass player and the keyboard player, and like these guys are all going to get this kind of cut. And then it's this dynamic pie. So a marketer they're going to get a cut, but for 6 months, versus everyone else gets it for the whole. And these smart contracts are really interesting in that way because you're starting to have the conversations about value and how to track it, and the rewards come really as that pie gets split.
I think I'm gonna
Okay.
ask you, is it a crazy idea for you to be an advisor on my startup for PQ? Because that it's a good idea. It's not dead yet. So
I that's my new retirement gig is being on
awesome,
advisory
Steve. All
boards.
right, let's get to some Q and additional Q&A. Adolfo, and then we're gonna go to Victor. Steve, thank you for this. Adolfo.
Thanks, Todd. And Steve, it's been a fantastic discussion. Thanks, Todd, for getting Steve to talk to us. So I have a number of questions. I will choose to ask one question and a follow-up question. Um, I heard you talked about framing the right problem, like defining the expectations and filtering, making it this scoping it right. But I also heard about this idea of looking for just ideas, like the lady and the waffle, right? No implementation. There's no innovation there. If we understand innovation as adoption in the market, right? So I wonder if you could talk about how your perception evolved from the beginning about what are the right ways of
Yeah.
presenting a challenge, because that sounds to be, to me, like the key, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the discovery phase, you're really looking for what do I not know, right? What are options or technologies or methods that I know nothing about. So this is where in the potato chip, this idea of, they were using reagents and vibrate, they were actually vibrating the chips as well, but it was breaking them because they were vibrating the chips. And her idea of vibrating the air around the chips was something that even though they were all experts in vibration, they had missed, right? And if you read Warren Berger's books about, questioning, More Beautiful Question, uh, he talks about there really are these studies that experts create bubbles around their understanding because everyone's kind of making the same assumptions about what will work and what won't work and what the constraints are and assumptions around the problem. And so open innovation, and particularly the ideation piece, is meant to be breaking those. But I would also contend it's also opening you up to analogous problems and solutions in other kind of industries that are next to yours or sometimes even very distant, right? So, for instance, in the Subsea 7, the mining industry and the pipeline inspection, they were both trying to do similar functions, and the mining industry had solved this problem already, right? So it's that getting that connection to the next spot. Am I answering your question? Like, you're really trying to get what you don't have. So if if you need a design and you're looking for, I don't want to do this, I want startups to form around solving this problem, then you're going to run a different kind of contest than if you have an in-house development team and you're simply trying to get them unstuck from problem and try to give them new ideas. So one might be an ideation that you're simply going to hand those ideas off. We did a full with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, it's still going on, called MagQuest. You can kind of go look it up, where we went from ideation for how to actually measure the magnetosphere where north is so that you can adjust GPS to be correct. That work is an international cooperative effort. And it's going to be the US's turn to have satellites up there that both measure and model the magnetosphere. Well, they decided they wanted to try out contests as the new procurement mechanism. So they actually ran a challenge. And what they did is they said, okay, we're going to award the top, I think it was 10 or 15 ideas. And they gave each of them like $30,000. And that was enough prize money that they could then develop an initial concept. And then there would be $100,000 prize sitting there, and that would be enough to do the next prototype phase. And by the time, and there's 3 firms that are currently doing this, if all 3 of them make it all the way through and launch and operate their spacecraft using prize funds, they will then get a big prize and the NGA will buy their data. So, like, there's models that take this end to end, and it's simply a higher risk procurement model because at any stage, any one of those folks could take their prize money and go home.
Right, right.
But what we find is nobody does that. They see the bigger picture, they are invested, they want to take it on it. And
Okay. No, that answered my question, right? There's ideas at different stages
yeah.
and needs at different stages
Yeah.
that you can tap into community. So with that, the follow-up question I have, and you briefly mentioned it, how would you recommend startups to engage this process? What's the general view that you have?
My general feel on open innovation and open talent is learn as much as you can about it and try it out on a small scale where you can so that you understand what the tool is and can use it. So for open talent, instead of hiring everyone on your team, make your marketing person or your accounting person a freelancer and build a bench of 2 or 3 of those that if they're not available, you've got someone else. And you go through that process of gaining trust and understanding who's good, and you do that until you get somebody good. On the open innovation part, start with a logo, go do a Fiverr logo or, just run a contest just so you get the idea of how do I work on Upwork or Fiverr or up on Freelancer or one of these. anymore you can use AI to do a lot of this stuff. So you got to find something that they're like, well, what's hard but I can afford, right? That I don't want to do. And you might, just doing text search and say, hey, we're about to do this. I know what the sensors are that I've been working, these analog sensors or something for some device. But why don't I put that out as a yet to text search and say, hey, yet to or Nine Sigma, can this is, I'm looking for this kind of sensing, is there something that I should be looking at that I'm not looking at? And have them go do it rather than somebody doing their own text search. Anymore, text search in particular, trying to find the products that are going to make up your product, it's best to actually get help with that because there's so much going on. I tell people, if quantum sensing is going to cause 100x improvement in the accuracy of your particular, performance of your product, and you have no one that even understands what quantum sensing is, like most people don't realize you can buy fish tank monitors that are quantum sensors on Amazon. They don't realize that we're that far in to quantum sensing. And you can get an image of a brick from their gravitational pull of each atom using quantum sensing. Like it's like we just don't, there's not good common knowledge about that. And so using these firms to kind of expand, here's the function I'm trying to get, what can help me do that? I think that's an important, mostly for tech, but
Yeah.
and non-software tech, but
Great. Well, thanks again. It's been fantastic to hear your story. Sure.
Thanks, Adolfo. ChatGPT, please explain quantum sensing to me. Victor, you're up, and then we'll go to Gary, and I guess we'll end it after Gary's
that's
question.
a worthwhile question to ask ChatGPT.
It is, right? I'm going to do it right now. Victor.
Yes, thank you, Steve. I'll start with, it was a pleasure to get to know you a little bit in the breakout. I also wanted to tell you, we all learned about open innovation, but I've never seen a deployment at this level. It's quite remarkable, and it actually changes my thinking tonight about the potential of open innovation. So thank you for that. A lot of what I was going to ask has already been discussed, but I'm going to take it to a slightly different facet. When I think of NASA, I think of national security. And I'm wondering, was your core team authorized to scrutinize that aspect of their contests, or was there oversight before something was actually released?
Yeah. Most of the secret stuff at NASA is ITAR. So it's technologies that will help folks navigate missiles, right? And GNC system, guidance navigation problems, and some rocket technologies. The question we would always ask first thing, like is kind of in the background even, was, is there anything sensitive? Is there anything that we can't talk about in this? And then we simply just wouldn't do challenges on those. We would talk. We would very much talk about if we ever hit that, the mechanism to go work on something that they had was be to decompose that problem into components that might not be sensitive. So the example be, this isn't sensitive, but if you have a life support system that you want to be super lightweight and low power, then go do the analysis to find out what's my heaviest components and my highest power consumers. And then maybe I just do a challenge on compressors, right? Which there's nothing classified or anything important about that. They apply to everything. But the solution to that could then be plugged in and be solving that bigger problem. So often you just don't have to go. With a little bit of creativity, you can get problem solved regardless of that. Most of NASA stuff is actually not classified. That got taken out in the 90s.
All right, so now I feel caught up
Good.
from the 90s. The other question has to do with the let's say the understanding of a solution that comes out of the contests. When you get a solution that comes out, in the process and model that you were working with, let's say pre AI, were you concerned with how the idea was generated, or do you just take the idea and build on it?
Yeah, the terms and conditions of usually the platform and the contest, sometimes in both, sometimes just in one, would really outline, look, this has to be original. If it's not original, you need to credit. If you're connecting us with something, that's fine, but you can't say this was my idea if it's not. Now, that doesn't totally release you, right? Because somebody else still might have thought of that and you patented it. So you still got to, before you go implement, kind of double check all of that. But there are always clauses. Now, keep in mind, most of the time we didn't take people's IP. Most of the time, if it was something that intellectual property would be generated, we would simply license it from them. So we would say, look, as part of this prize process, we get a royalty-free license to use because we're paying you $400,000 or whatever it is, right? Now, if if NASA was the only customer, then that's exactly the same as me saying I want your IP, right? Because who are you going to sell it to, right? And so that would always be part of the conversation in terms of when we were setting it up. Usually in a lot of the Competes Act and other, and I didn't make this distinction, but it's an important distinction. We actually only ran as NASA challenges, Competes Act challenges, which were US only, where the government paid the prize. However, we would pay HeroX, Topcoder, and the rest to go run a contest and provide us a solution back. And all we were really doing was contracting out for a solution. And they could run international challenges. And in a Competes, the IP had to stay with the winner. We actually couldn't take it or even license. Now we can negotiate afterwards. But in these others, you could have all the other models. So there were really different ways, depending on what we were trying to do, that we could deal with that. And it's a trade, because if you ask for IP and say, I'm going to give you $10,000 for it, people aren't stupid. Like, if you're doing that level of work, people aren't giving away their ideas.
Sure.
And that's a distinction, I think, in Todd and our discussion, we probably could have gotten into more, which is an idea or a connection is not worth nearly as much as somebody's real work there. It's still worth something, and it still has value. And you have valid concerns in your worth concept, but it's simply a different world.
Okay. And then the follow-up to that is, fast forward to now the world of AI and whatever extensions that becomes. Do you foresee having to change your processes that you were used to pre-AI with regard to either the execution of the contest or the validation of the result?
The terms, as I understand it right now, are pretty much that you, as the submitter, have all of the same kind. Like, you're responsible for making sure this isn't generated in a way that's going to get you in trouble, right? So, like, you're taking on that responsibility, and so there's some liability on the user there. You've got to watch that. I think we will see AI introduced in the evaluation, to where it's going to be doing searches, IP searches and other things, to make sure that somebody hasn't basically given you someone else's idea. But I don't. It's a really interesting question, because on the one hand, you want people to be able to use AI to help them generate better products for you and better, well thought out. It's kind of like Ethan Mullick, right? He doesn't have people in his business school just generate a business plan for their MBA anymore. Like, that's the first week. Then you've got to actually generate 4 businesses and he wants you to generate AI. Same in here, right? We want our people to be using it, but all of that comes with the baggage of AI, right? Which is, how do you make sure you've got good stuff?
Awesome.
All right. Listen, I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure learning from you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Steve, how are you doing on time? Are we okay?
I'm fine. Yeah.
All right, good. All right, so Gary and then Kenneth, and after Kenneth we'll go into we'll end the recording. Gary, you are up, sir. Oh, you're muted. Give Gary a second. There we go.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Interesting. I just want to give you a little bit of background because you in Todd's intro email was, if you don't know NASA, whatever, all that stuff. My dad worked at Grumman.
Oh yeah.
My dad made the first Grumman rocket.
Wow.
He worked on the lunar module,
Too cool.
and he started Gulfstream in '70.
Wow.
So it's emotional because
No, I will tell you, I worked on the Constellation Lunar program when we were putting together, and over, our designers would come back and say, I just don't know how the Apollo era guys did it. They got the solution so right and so ahead of its time, given the constraints of what, I mean, they were still using slide rules, right? Like it's amazing what they did. Now, I will also say there was enough money, 10 times our current budget, just going to that program where they were able to put 5 teams out at once, right? Go ahead.
but they didn't know how deep the sand would be.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. Now I have a lot of good friends that worked on the Apollo program, and they're true heroes. It was amazing.
Yeah, so that's where I come from.
Excellent. Well, you should be very proud.
Awesome, Gary. Thanks.
Yeah, but two, like you worked, Steve, you worked multiple teams, and without AI, and that amazes me. So,
yeah. No, it's it'll be interesting to see what they can do now, just because.
or you, I know you're retired.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be fascinating to kind of watch. And the commercial world is now involved in spaceflight in a way that wasn't for a long time, and I think that's gonna just create some really interesting multiplications on what's going on in space. I fully expect. Well, the fact that that crew of what, 5, 7, whatever women just went up, and everybody was kind of like agog. I'm like, this has been happening for 5 years. Like it's this is not anything new. Like normal people. I have friends who have gone up into space just because it's accessible now. So and I think it's a rich time for people to be involved in that in lots of different ways.
And SpaceX, I don't know, SpaceX and NASA.
We're not allowed to talk about SpaceX.
Well, that's what I was curious.
The first rule of SpaceX.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't talk about it. So yeah, but anyway, open innovation is great. Contests, I love all the contest stuff. The fact that NASA is doing it was great. And you mentioned blockchain, and I've been following blockchain since 2016. I don't know what it's done. Except for cyber security.
Yeah.
Well, not crypto.
I think there's, it's interesting. I keep meeting startups that are DAO based, that have taken the DAO stack and created that as their kind of, organizational governance and automation system. And they don't tell anyone that they're DAO based because nobody understands what it is. But it's happening. And honestly, I think it is one of the key tools potentially to do a couple of things. One, to make it easier to stand up an organization and instantiate something. The second, I think, is for the open talent world. I think it will be the kind of foundational piece to universal IDs and background checks, where you've got a trusted third party that keeps all your valuable information, such that a business can trust you
Yep.
in your background check and everything else, and in a
Yep.
way that literally someone can they can find you and start using you within the hour, right?
So is Solidity still a thing?
Uh, Good question. There's a lot of
Uh,
those books doing that.
Programming, like
Yeah.
it's behind because I do like the idea of the contracts.
Mhm. Yep, smart contracts. Yeah,
I love that idea
yeah,
in a big way, especially for the military, because they move around a lot,
yep.
and change of ownership of a property or a car. It makes so much sense
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it spins off, and can they make it kind of like generative AI? Can they make it less
Right.
resource intensive? And there's been some attempts at that, and
You,
yeah,
yeah, you went there
yeah,
because the data centers are
yeah,
just
yeah.
crazy.
But we also have quantum computing coming, so that once you apply quantum computing to some of
It
all
all
of this,
changes everything.
starts to get really weird really quick. Which I'm
Yeah.
surprised how many times in the last week I've heard people in the government talk about um, is it- they're basically talking about when quantum comes online. It's
Yeah.
already a little bit online, and security basically fails across the world. Which
I can't wait for
Yeah.
that.
right,
Can't wait for
exactly.
that. It's gonna
Okay,
happen.
anything else,
Gary,
Gary?
Steve, no, I just absolutely thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, and
Thanks.
your dad's amazing. It sounds like he
My
has an
dad's
amazing
sick.
legacy.
Thanks, Gary. All right, Kenneth, you are up.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, Steve, thank you for the presentation. I would like to more so speak like to the other side, like the people who are solving the problems.
Yeah,
I'm an engineer, and I feel like one of the problems I face is, like how do you identify problems that are worth solving,
uh,
right?
yeah,
And like I guess also, how do you test those problems efficiently so that you can kind of recognize, okay, this is the right solution, right?
yeah. I like to think that almost every engineer should reframe their job as, what problem do I own? In other words, what is my responsibility in terms of, like, what would you get a big raise for? Is it we could produce this widget instead of 2 weeks in 2 days, or we could bring the cost down, or we could make it one with less power, or, is there hardware that you're responsible for? And is it process? Is it, what is it? And then what I find is really useful is kind of take down the metrics of, how fast do we get this done? How much does it cost us? Uh, how many piece parts are there? All right, what's the supply chain like? And if you think about the business that you're in, and this is kind of tricky because I don't know what business everyone's in, but the problem, everyone is solving a problem, right? That's what a startup, that's what a company is doing, is you're solving somebody's problem. And you're doing that through a bunch of solutions that are solutions to a bunch of little problems, right? How do we get the word out about this? How do we explain people what it does? How do we keep it reliable? And you can really take any piece of that and come up with a whole list of problems, honestly. And the problems that you want to focus on are the high value ones. Um, are you guys familiar with the iceberg of ignorance? Uh, yeah, Todd. In any organization, the top management really only understands like 5, maybe 10% of all problems in the organization. And the organization typically, and I'm talking about large organizations, right? Somebody in that organization understands what's broken and what the fixes are, or at least what the problems are. And so part of it is, who else is in your organization? Do they see problems that you don't see, right? and what are how do you get together to kind of come up with solutions for this? But I do a whole workshop on problem identification and analysis. There's a great book called Sprint by the Google Ventures Sprint team, Jake Knapp, where he kind of spells out a whole workshop that you can do with kind of the main players in an organization to help you discover the problem that you're looking at and then go through an exercise of solving it that's kind of helpful in seeing it all. And often at the end of that, people will go, oh, we picked the wrong problem, but we wouldn't have seen that if we hadn't picked this problem and tried to solve it. So it is not an easy thing that you're asking, but part of it is framing it. And I always like to say the best problem is when you understand like what piece you own and you can describe it in terms of cost, performance, and all of that, then try to think of what's on the edge of my imagination of how good that can do. So if I produce this in 2 weeks, is there a world where I can make that in 24 hours? Is there a world where instead of 25 watts, I can take that down to a single watt? Is there a way I can make this weigh 1 pound instead of 150? Like, in the gap between where you are now and where you think you might be able to get to on the edge of possibility, spanning that gap is your problem. Hope that helps.
Awesome. Kenneth, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great.
Steve, I am so incredibly grateful. It's already 10 o'clock where we are Eastern. This was such a treat. I don't have the words to fully express how much I appreciate your time and coming and joining us. Dude, thank you.
No, this is great. I'm so glad you guys do this. It's such a rich conversation that you guys have, and it's a rich. You can tell you guys are really pulling on each other for great questions and great just analysis of everything. So good
And
stuff.
unfortunately Susan couldn't be here and Kelly couldn't be here, but one of the questions that Susan always asks at the end of the sessions is there anything that we can do to help you with the things that you're working on?
Right now I am, trying to align my passions with various startups and trying to help them through advisory board roles. So if anything I said sounds like it aligns with things that we could do together, I'm happy to do that. I'm, you know, if you think I can be helpful, I definitely try to be helpful, but I'm not looking for a big, full-time job or anything. I do talks. Probably a little more eloquent than I did this one. This
Oh
one's
no, you were perfect, dude. No, this is great.
but I do go into organizations and talk about open innovation and open talent. I go to conferences. I've done workshops. I'll go to Spain here in a couple weeks to teach BBVA for like the 5th time on open innovation. So if you ever have an organization you want to have, like I do consulting, right? So
Wonderful.
consulting and speaking. And then if you hear somebody wants a speaker, that'd be great if you can connect with people. But I'm on LinkedIn. I also put my information, my email on here. And you guys have the presentation. So if you need that, I can also paste it in, I guess.
I can forward it to the group.
Okay, cool.
Steve, thank you so much. Folks, I'm going to end the recording now. Please do stick around for some overtime, and we will see you next week with Susan giving us an update on her startup, Team Stack. All right, thanks for joining.